Hi everyone, this is Jacob and it's finally Friday. Today I wanted to go over best practices for our wireless. So we're in our wireless controller. In order to set best practices, we have to go over to the APs. And there's a couple different ways we can do this. One, we can just click on any of the APs that we want to change settings on, and that opens up a separate box with just that AP on it. We can hit configure, and within that box we can navigate to the different radios. Radio 1 is always your 5 gig radio, and radio 2 is your 2.4 radio. There are more settings that you can adjust than just these, but you have to go down to the advanced tab down here, and that will open up all the different settings you can change on that radio. Obviously, there are differences between the two. There are some settings on 2.4 you can't change on 5 gig because of the differences in the technology. So that's how you edit on an individual basis. You can also multi-edit by just checking off the ones you want to edit, coming down and hitting actions, and hit multi-edit. That allows you to change all the different settings for all those APs, both the 2.4 and the 5 gig radio. So you make your changes and hit apply, and that will change the settings on those radios. The last way you can manage your AP settings is to set the default settings. Default settings are under the global tab. You can go to default, and then you can pick the different APs. So if you're dealing with 3935s, you'd pick that 3935 AP. You can also get to the advanced settings by hitting advanced. These settings will be used whenever you plug in an AP to your network. The AP will call home to the controller and will automatically set their settings according to the default settings. So let's go through here and set these to the best practices. A lot of these top ones we will leave, with many of them being a matter of preference, such as the LED, whether you want it to be normal or set to off. The radio settings is where we're going to focus at on this video. The DTIM setting sets how often the AP tells the clients about queued broadcast and multicast traffic. We want to set that down to 2 on both radios. The beacon setting we want to leave as default, along with the next couple settings. The RTS CTS, that stands for request to send, clear to send. Your frag threshold, that sets how many bytes can be sent without fragmentation. Those settings we all want to leave as the default. Dynamic channel set is a way that we automatically set all the channels on your network. There are a couple different options here. We can turn it monitor mode or active mode. Active mode will change your settings throughout the day whenever certain thresholds are met that we'll talk about in a second. Monitor mode will just monitor those settings. And if you have Extreme Management Center, we can get alarms off those settings. I did a video about that previously. So normally we want to leave this on monitor mode. There are times where you would want to switch it to active mode if you cannot do a static channel plan. Static channel plans are always the best, but if you do not have the ability to set a static channel plan, that's when we could use active mode in the least busy period of operation. Like for a K12, that would be overnight. And then in the morning, we would switch it back to monitor mode, where it is not changing throughout the day. The noise threshold should be set around -80. And the channel occupancy threshold, I like to set it at 50. And that will just let us know whenever a channel is occupied more than 50% of the time. That is when your data will start being affected. Voice is affected well before then, but data becomes affected around 50%. You can change the update period. So if you switch this to active, it will change every 5 minutes if it's sensing interference. You can also tell the 2.4 radio whether it should change when it senses the presence of Bluetooth, microwave, cordless phones, a consistent wave, or a video bridge. So you can enable or disable those. We like to leave those as disabled because many times those are going to be the things that move in and out, like Bluetooth. Those aren't going to be a consistent interference. Those are going to move around. So we don't want to change around Bluetooth. And that goes for microwaves as well. We don't want to change channels just because a microwave is kicked on. If you do enable any of these, you can also set a wait time, which means that interference has to be there for 10 minutes before it will make any changes. There are some grayed out options that we cannot change. Protection mode on 2.4 should be set to auto, so we'll leave that as a default. Protection rate we will leave as default. The protection type, we'll leave that as a default as well as just the CTS only. Your minimum basic rates, you want to move up to 24 if at all possible. This is going to deal with the density of your environment. If your APs are very dense, you'll be able to get away with 24. If not, you may have to move it down to 12. And that's for both the 2.4 and 5 gig radios. We want to move that up to the highest possible minimum basic rate. So if you move it to 24 and you get a lot of calls about issues on your wireless network, then you may want to bump it down to 12. That brings me to say you don't want to make a ton of changes all at once. We want to make changes slowly. That way we can get a feel for how those changes will affect our network. So raising the minimum basic rate will help with sticky clients, but we also have probe suppression settings that will also help with sticky clients. When I say sticky clients, that is when a client doesn't want to roam, that it thinks it has a good enough signal not to go ahead and roam to a better AP with better signal. So what we can do is turn on probe suppression for both bands and force deauthentication for both bands. And then we will set the RSS threshold to 65. And what this will do is when a client gets to -70 dBm, which is 5 less than the -65, then it will be forced to roam to a different AP. It will be sent a disassociation frame and will be forced to go to a better AP. This is a setting that you want to be careful with, because if you have holes in your environment, you can really cause some clients to not be able to connect. This is something that you can set and then wait for a little while to see how the reactions are. It will definitely speed up your environment if you can get away with it. If you're having issues with clients not being able to connect, you can come in here and you can adjust these down a little bit. So you could go to -70 dBm, which would in turn force the client to roam at -75, which would increase the cell size a little bit. We would like to get it to -65 if at all possible, but that is another setting you want to change slowly. You can leave the next 4 settings as default, and then we'll get into the final radio settings. We can adjust the guard interval. The guard interval ensures that the air is clear. We want to try to get this to the short guard interval, that is the default, but if you're having a lot of retransmissions, then it may be that the environment is very reflective and you have a lot of signal bouncing around. You can change this to the long guard interval to help with some of that. However, if you do change to the long guard interval, you will be slowing down your network. So we want to do that sparingly. So we will leave that as a short guard interval unless we have reasons to change it. And that would be more on an individual AP basis. Protection mode should be set to auto. Protection type, CTS only. We will leave the aggregate frame settings as the defaults. The last setting that I want to mention is multi-user MIMO. That was a big marketing point for 802.11 AC, but we want to disable that. And that's because the overhead that it takes in order to make multi-user MIMO work will make your network more inefficient because of the transmit beamforming sounding that has to happen. If you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me and I can walk you through what I mean by all that. So that's the settings on the wireless controller. That's how you can quickly set up your wireless tube best practices. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week.